Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kim Verrier, and I am the exhibitions coordinator at the Red Deer Museum and Art Gallery. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement before we jump into today's presentation. In the spirit of reconciliation, the MAG recognizes that this land on which we live is at the convergence of Treaty 6 territory, representing the Nehiyawak, Saulteaux, and Dene peoples, and Treaty 7 territory, representing the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Kainai, and Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda, as well as the Métis peoples. We strive in the spirit of the treaties to keep this a place of trust, friendship, and promise. The exhibition that we are featuring this afternoon, Prairie Vernacular, comes to us from the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and the Esplanade Arts and Heritage Centre in Medicine Hat, Alberta. We are the last stop on the exhibition schedule, and we are pleased that we are able to have a number of works from our own collection travel with the show. We would like to thank all of our funders, the City of Red Deer, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and supporters without whom we wouldn't be able to bring exhibitions such as this to our community. This exhibition received major funding and support from the Government of Canada's Canadian Heritage Fund, Saskatchewan Arts, the Saskatchewan Council, as well as the City of Moose Jaw and the City of Medicine Hat. Your team today consists of myself, who will be wandering the galleries highlighting the work. Carly, our marketing coordinator, is keeping the technology flowing, and our two special guests. I am pleased today to be able to have two curators of the exhibition, Prairie Vernacular, with us virtually. Jennifer McRorie has been the curatorial director at the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan since 2015. She has been active for more than 20 years in the Saskatchewan arts community as an arts administrator, curator, arts writer, and visual artist, serving in many roles within various arts organizations and galleries, including the Saskatchewan Arts Board, the Organization of Saskatchewan Arts Councils, Carfax, Saskatchewan, the Mackenzie Art Gallery, Dunlop Art Gallery, the Elsie Sherrill Gallery, and the University of Lethbridge Art Gallery, where she started out as a curatorial intern. Jennifer holds an MFA with distinction from the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, and a BFA from the University of Regina. Our other curator today is Joanne Marion, who recently retired in the last year as curator and director of exhibitions and collections at the Esplanade Arts and Heritage Centre in Medicine Hat, Alberta. She was working in that position for 3 years prior. Prior to that, she was a curator and director of the Esplanade Art Gallery for 17 years. She has curated many solo and group touring exhibitions and produced numerous exhibition catalogs, as well as contributed texts for collaborative curatorial and publication projects. She received a BFA from Queen's University and an MFA from the University of Guelph. Welcome, Jennifer and Joanne.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. Thanks for inviting us to do a curator talk with the exhibition this afternoon. And so Joanne and I thought that we would approach it like a walking tour through the gallery. I guess we could start by saying that talking about where the idea for the exhibition came about. So I had approached Joanne about the idea of partnering on an exhibition that looked at folk art on the prairies, and then also looking at connections that folk artists or folk art has had with contemporary art and contemporary artists. When I was looking through our own permanent collection at the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery, we have a significant amount of folk art, and I thought it would be great to highlight some of these pieces. But I also came across, learned that artists like Joe Faffard, who you see here, this is his piece titled Ford. Joe Faffard, Victor Sekansky, David Thalberg, and Russ Uristi all had connections and were influenced by folk art. They were wanting to make work about the life experience and about where they came from in mainstream contemporary art. And so folk artists were already doing that. They were making work about life on the prairies, about their memories of as immigrants coming to the prairies or growing up on the prairies. And so the folk artists gave these Regina artists sort of a context to make their own work in. So yeah, Joanne agreed to come on board, and we took on the huge undertaking of representing basically prairie vernacular art in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Our concept for the show did shift as we did research and began looking at works. It became not so much a strict connection to folk art, but looking at artists who were speaking about life and history, culture on the prairies, historically and in contemporary art, but also like looking at artists that maybe draw from aesthetic approaches that you can find in folk art, or just shared concerns, shared contexts and thematics. So I'll let Joanne speak, but as we were looking at different pieces in various collections across the prairies, we started seeing similar connections that resulted things like, and so it became, started thinking that it would be good to create categories, to organize the works and create dialogue between the historic and contemporary works. Some of the themes that we started seeing was everyday life, Prairie Vernacular, or sorry, Prairie Gothic, memory, humor and playfulness, and sort of politics and religion, and surrealism and fantasy. And so where we are right now in the exhibition in Red Deer is in the area of everyday life. So Joanne, did you want to talk about some pieces?
Yeah, everyday life ended up being, I think, the largest section because so many folk artists and contemporary artists, really focused on that through their sense of the vernacular. So what we're looking at right now is work by Hazel Litzkis, and I think the one on the bottom there was called Canning Peaches. And she sort of takes an aerial view, and she's showing all of the steps in the process of canning peaches. So you could follow it and can peaches along with Hazel. So she's really interested in being very precise about documenting the process and documenting her memory of growing up on the prairies and the kinds of activities that they engaged in every day. So it's those pieces are really perfect to open the exhibition with. And if we can pull back a little bit more, now we're looking at the work of Alan Sapp, and I might pass that over to you, Jen, because he's also documenting everyday life on the Red Pheasant Reserve. First Nation.
Yeah. So we wanted to include some Indigenous artists in the exhibition, and we actually approached Dr. Carmen Robertson, an Indigenous curator and arts writer and professor, to basically write on the Indigenous work in the collection, as well as provide consultation on how to exhibit the Indigenous work. And so, it's lovely to include Alan Sapp. I mean, he was an untrained artist, and so he sort of fits into sort of our description of the vernacular artists as being untrained. And yeah, he wanted to depict life on Red Pheasant First Nation, which is up near North Battleford in Saskatchewan. And so we thought it was important to include Indigenous work, because a lot of folk art exhibitions in the past have mainly focused on settler culture on the prairies and settler history. And so we wanted to make sure that we included the work of Indigenous artists so that there was, it was a more inclusive representation of prairie experience and prairie histories.
When Norman wrote a wonderful essay for the exhibition and for the catalog, and she ties work by people like Alan Sapp to the earlier traditions of historical narrative on hides, which would predominantly be done by men, and things like story robes. So we'll come back to that a little bit later as well, but really interesting text to start out there.
And I'll talk a little bit about, in this space, you'll see work by Victor Sekansky, and this work here, Heritage Seeds. Victor is a Saskatchewan artist, and he's been known to work in clay and make work that references the gardens and the pantries of his Roman immigrant in east part of Regina, which was known as Garlic Flats. And there's another piece here. And this is a series of works that he's known for where he's referencing canning, like the different products from the garden, which was again something that his family did. And so his work ties into his family history and references life on the prairies as well, his experience of it. We also have images of works of Joe Faffard in this space here. So here we have a portrait of Harvey McGinnis. Harvey was a well-known Saskatchewan folk artist that Joe knew and admired. And it's a wonderful depiction of Harvey here, done in clay.
And I think, yeah, his work was just to the left of it.
Yeah, and it's displayed right beside Harvey McGinnis's work. Harvey, again, he did depictions of Saskatchewan and Alberta, and a lot of it is like colored pencil, little bit of mixed media. And so this sort of introduces, by placing these together, it introduces the idea of the connections that that happened between artists like Joe Faffard and David Thalberg or Vic Sekansky and some of the folk artists in Saskatchewan. They were, the Regina artists were inspired by the folk artists' work. They wanted to support it, so they began actually collecting their work. They also curated works of theirs.
Sorry, okay. I was just heading to the other door.
Sure. Yeah, this is a work called Pieta by Joe Faffard. And yeah, this is a bird's eye view of the prairie by Joe Faffard. So yeah, Joe, he created the interesting exchange that happened was artists like Molly Lenhart. She actually did portraits of some of the Regina artists. So we do have a portrait that she did of the Faffard family. So that's Joe Faffard and his wife at the time, and their young children canoeing in Pence, where they were living. This is just outside of Regina. And as I was saying, the Regina artists, they collected some of the folk artists' work, curated shows, and they also collaborated with them on a piece that was called The Grain Bin. And that was a piece that actually went to the 1976 Montreal Olympics. So yeah, Molly, she showed her appreciation of and the respect that she had for the Regina artists. And then like Joe Faffard paid tribute to the folk artists by doing portraits of them. But David Thalberger, which is right beside the Molly Lenhart, he also paid tribute to some of the folk artists. This is a tribute that he has created. It's called Prairie Sentinel, Winter Sentinel, and it's a lenticular light box image. So as you move around the work, it changes from morning to night and from spring or fall to winter. And this is a tribute to the artist William Mackarger. Mackarger was a well-respected folk artist in Saskatchewan. He used to paint. He used to work for the railway, and so a lot of his imagery would be basically his view of the grain elevator and either a road or a track, rail track, and he would paint that same image, almost like Monet would paint at different times of the day and different seasons. He would paint the same image of the grain elevator in the daytime and in the evening, and in winter and in spring or in summer. And so this is a tribute to William Mackarger. The other interesting thing too is David Thalberger in his work. He drew from a lot of folk artists and used different compositional strategies or approaches in his work that you would see in some folk artists' work. So you can see this piece this is called Power Line by David Thalberger, and the garage here is the architecture of it is forced up into the front of the picture plane, so it really flattens the sense of space in the work. Other thing I'll note here is that you have to get really close to see this work, but there is glitter in the work, which is again, a reference to sort of craft-based approaches that you would see in some. You'll see actually glitter in some William Mackarger works. David has also applied paint by flecking paint with. Oh yeah, so this is William Mackarger's work here. You can see the Winter Sentinel there. And yeah, there is bits of glitter in the sky there. And yeah, David would apply paint by flicking paint from a toothbrush, again, kind of referencing more of a craft approach to painting. If you don't mind going to the Molly Lenhart piece, the Canadian Ukrainian girl. Yes, on the other side. Sorry, getting Kim to do some walking here. And here we have another piece by Molly Lenhart. This is really sort of exemplary of her work. She did a lot of paintings of references to her Ukrainian heritage, and you can see she again has taken the figure of the Ukrainian girl and pushed it up into the foreground of the picture plane, and so that that's a nice relation to David Thalberger's work. And I believe if you turn around, Kim, and go towards the Prairie Gothic, there's a work by George Tosic from Alberta that does the same. Oh yeah, if you turn left, yeah, straight ahead there.
Oh,
there we go. Yeah.
And again, you can see he's done the same thing here, just really sort of simplified the architecture, really flattened it, abstracted it, and pushed it up in the foreground. So that's a nice connection to David Thalberger and Molly Lenhart's work as well.
And it takes us into sort of a darker side of vernacular art, both in terms of folk art and in terms of contemporary artists. George Tosic often looked at things like racism or the Depression years in Alberta, drunk driving, some very dark and negative aspects of life on the prairies, and that's seen in the work of vernacular artists, very connected to their times, not always just happy, joyful scenes of canning and things like that, but some of the more difficult things that would be encountered in small towns and rural areas, just as today. And I think just to the right of George Tosic's work, there are two works by Frank Chukanski that, Jen, you want to speak to those?
Sure. So Frank Sekansky was actually the father of Victor Sekansky, and he was an immigrant to Saskatchewan from Romania. And so actually when he retired in the 60s from working, he started painting about his memories of working on Saskatchewan farms and homesteads in the late 20s and in the 30s. And so these are depictions of the Depression years, his memories of people abandoning their farms, loading up all of their belongings and leaving. You can see he's written with text, and it says dead, an arrow. So he's got their basically horses and cattle that are lying dead in the fields. There's a figure there saying water, mister, or I die. So referencing how the wells had run dry. There's like, he's got their dust and an arrow there. So his work is really interesting. I love how he's incorporated text into, there's the home brew shack there, and grasshoppers. He's got an arrow there. So really referencing the tragedy that so many people experienced during the Depression years. And so, this was another category that we wanted to feature in the exhibition, because not only did we see Prairie Gothic in some of the work of folk artists, but in contemporary artists as well. And so actually we're looking at the work of Ruth Cuthand right now. This is a drawing of hers, and this is from the Sask Arts collection. So here she was referencing some of the racism that she experienced when she was actually training as a teacher. And so, Prairie Gothic is a genre that refers to darker narratives and tragedies of prairie life.
And also some of the changes that have been happening over the last 50, 70 years in terms of rural communities across the prairies kind of emptying out into cities, and sort of a disappearance of that way of life.
Yeah, so we could talk about, go to Heather Benning's video, because she's specifically referencing that.
Sorry, I forgot to hit the play.
That's okay.
Well, so, we could go back to George to William Kurlek if it's not ready to run. Oh, there we go.
So Heather Benning, this is a video that Heather created with the filmmaker, and it's called The Dollhouse. And so she's actually, this was an artwork actually that she created when she was doing an art residency. And she came across this abandoned farmhouse, and it's just over the border in Manitoba. And she actually got permission from the owner to basically recreate what it would have looked at. It was abandoned, I guess, in the 1960s. So she furnished it with furnishings from the 60s to reference the time when it was abandoned. But she also took the back wall of the house off and put up a wall of plexiglass. So she made it into a full-scale dollhouse. And after it was there for a number of years, it was starting to, there was concerns about the safety of the building. So basically her and the owner decided that it should be bulldozed. And so anyway, they decided to burn it down, with safety. There was some fire engine, firefighters there and everything, but she's documented the building burning here, and again making a statement about the loss of the family farm and how corporate farming is taking over and causing this change in the in prairie life.
And one of the things that's so poignant about this performance installation in the end, I guess, is that a lot of the belongings that you see burning are, I think, were her aunts. Is that correct, Jen? They belong to her aunt. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so they actually disappeared in the destruction of the house.
Right.
Really poignant piece.
Right.
Are we close to Jude Griebel's work, Kim?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just before we go, okay, if you want to go ahead, I was just going to say about the Indigenous Prairie Gothic.
Oh,
so
yes.
We've got Sherry Farrell Reset here and Ellen Benjamin Clark. So in talking to Dr. Carmen Robinson, and in her essay, she references Indigenous Prairie Gothic. And so these are like Indigenous artists that are referencing colonial and cultural trauma, the history of the residential school system. Here, Sherry Farrell Reset is referencing, this is Riel's Vision of Death, the title of this, and she's got some writing by Riel and about this vision he had. So referencing the Northwest Rebellion, and the Métis culture, the history of the Métis culture on the prairies, and then the work of Ellen Benjamin Clark, which is beside references the history of the residential school system. So, Joanne, if you'd like to talk about Jude's piece.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sort of breaking up a little bit sound-wise here. Yeah. So we were sort of segueing, I think, a little bit from Prairie Gothic and into Jude's work kind of fits in numerous areas. He's an contemporary Alberta artist who navigates between Sundre, Alberta, and New York. And this piece called Ground Drinker, you can sort of see has a sort of surreal, fantastical elements to it that are nonetheless playful. So it's a way in for viewers to think about the environmental conditions on the prairies in terms of oil and gas, and how that ties to climate change and things like that, and personalizing it with this sort of fantastical and somewhat humorous figure. And right next to it is a piece called Grandmother's House, which is reminiscent a little bit of Heather Benning's piece, and again showing the family farmhouse. And I think that is some of his grandmother's hair, if I'm not mistaken. And the abandonment of the house, and again sort of personalizing it, anthropomorphizing it somewhat. And it has perhaps a little bit less playfulness, but certainly entering into the arena of the fantastical and the surreal.
Okay. So yeah, I guess if we go and look at some other examples of surrealism and fantasy.
That could be Chris Reed with her eggs, perhaps, and the yellow house piece, if those are nearby. Yeah, there. So Chris Reed is originally from a Ukrainian community in Alberta, but she spent at least the last 20 years or more in Brandon. And she's making use of her Ukrainian heritage and mythology with, of course, the painted eggs. But if you look closely at them, you can see their scenes of contemporary life, modern houses, televisions, and she's got a series of characters that reappear both in in her eggs and in the sculptural pieces and in her drawings that are related to Ukrainian culture as well. Like that house that's nearby, that the little sculpture of the house that's nearby is on Baba Yaga legs. And so it has the ability to run around when Baba Yaga, who's a sort of a kind of a witch figure in Ukrainian mythology, when she's not home, the house can run around. and here she's referencing not only the Ukrainian sort of folklore, but also contemporary concerns about housing. Chris works with people who are challenged in that area, and is very aware of how sort of tenuous some people's grasp of the comforts and the security of home are. So,
I just saw Russell Euricides' Six piece and the ceramic beer bottle. This is a work that I didn't speak about the connections to California of the ceramic movement that happened in Regina in the 70s. And that was, so Vic Sekansky and David Thalberger, Joe Faffard, and Russ Euricides. They were all a part of a ceramic movement that was connected to California. And so the California Funk Ceramics, which was happening in the 60s and 70s, Vic Sekansky and David Thalberger both went to California for graduate school, and so were exposed to California funk aesthetics, I guess, and which was California funk was looking at incorporating irony, personal narrative, responding to popular culture, and like humor and surrealism. And so a lot of the work is very humorous, and you can see this is very playful. It also seems like it should have a warning that says "Do not drink and operate farm equipment, farm machinery." Yeah, so this is a good example of some of the work that was influenced by California funk, and it kind of became known as Regina funk. And so, yeah, this is a great example of it.
Yeah, and the humor and playfulness, we ended up distinguishing between the two, where playfulness is really sort of, we just switched by Wendy Parsons, which might have worked, but anyway, where playfulness is lighthearted and very accessible, sort of cheerful approach to life, which many of the Regina funk artists actually shared, and even people into Manitoba like Jordan Van Sewell. But then it can slide as well into humor. So there's George Markel there, just down on the right, the little panter dog piece that's on the plinth there, that little dog. So those are, and the little rabbit pulling a chariot kind of thing, pulling a wagon, or driving a wagon. George Markel was a farmer who retired in Medicine Hat, actually, and used a lot of found material, so that this panter dog has a sort of he used sawdust and fluff and things like that. So it's got all these adhesions that are sort of fuzzy, and it's got googly eyes, and so it's really, really playful and humorous at the same time. But then also within the exhibition, in the work of people like a bit of Jordan Van Sewell, who's on the wall there behind, can sort of edge into a humor that's darker. And we really see that in the work of people like Diana Thornycroft with the, is it Massacre in Moose Jaw?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that piece there, it's definitely humorous, but and playful, but it's a definitely a darker humor, and perhaps it's commentary on nationalism or Canadian American tensions, where Mickey Mouse is kind of being drawn and quartered in Moose Jaw. Does that relate to a historical episode in Moose Jaw, Jen, or is that too?
No, it's fictional. Yeah,
completely fictional. Yeah, with a sort of observing groundhogs.
Yeah.
Although there was probably plenty of massacres of groundhogs throughout the prairies.
Yeah. So Diana Thornycross' piece here is in a sort of an area of politics and religion, and so we've got work also by Dimitra Strajic here, and a couple portraits of clergy in the church, which are really wonderful.
And some social commentary just to the right.
By Jerry Kaiser. Jerry Kaiser is a contemporary, what I would consider a contemporary folk artist. He's actually based out just outside of Moose Jaw in Baildon. And this is actually an image of Moose Jaw, and it's called Tim's Tulips. And so there's all these Tim Horton coffee cups littered all over the city, and which he's sort of alluding that they're like tulips. Growing. So yeah, this is social commentary on some of the like homelessness and maybe some poverty that you would see in Moose Jaw, in other cities, as well as just disregard, I guess, for the environment as well.
Yeah, and Fafard's portrait of Jean Chrétien, which is a really beautiful piece. You can, and he's I think probably admire Jean Chrétien from the way that the portrait is sort of elegant and elongated and very sort of stately. With a lot of dignity in this portrait. Yeah.
Just beside the portrait there is Wrecking Ball, which is by Jordan Van Sewell. And I just thought I'd mention Jordan. Jordan is from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he's actually originally from Moose Jaw, born and raised in Moose Jaw, but he's sort of our Manitoba artist that has connections to the California funk movement. So he was heavily influenced by like Vic Sekansky and Joe Faffard and David Gilhooly, who was a California artist that was teaching at the University of Regina for a couple of years. And so he adopted sort of the funk sort of approach of incorporating humor while commenting on prairie life. And so it's great to have an artist from another province that connects to that history and that aesthetic.
And another cross-border, I don't know if you wanted to speak about this later, but Jen, but another cross-border kind of exchange was the Grand Western print shop.
Yes.
That connects, print works by David Thauberger and Joe Faffard and Bill Lobchuk, the afternoon.
Yeah, Leonard Anthony and Don Prosch.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was what became known as the Grand Western Canadian Screen Shop in Winnipeg, and that's a piece by Bill Lobchuk right there. Bill Lobchuk was the founder. So back in the 70s, some of the Regina artists began experimenting with printmaking. And so they worked with Bill Lobchuk and Leonard Anthony. This is a piece by Don Prosch, again from based in Manitoba, and who was connected to the screen shop as well. So they really put printmaking on the map, and they also were really interested in depicting imagery and life on the prairies, a prairie sensibility in their work. So it was a really great connection to like artists like Joe Faffard, Vic Sekansky, and David Thalberger, who were and Rusty Risty, who were also driven by that.
Yeah.
There's a really nice connection if you look up to Don Proche's
To the left.
Just to the left, to Don Proche's print there with the lone cloud over top of the train track, and you look to the piece above it. This piece is by Rick Garanko, and there's really nice connection with those like clouds and like the highway and the train tracks, which both of them connect to William Mackarger. Joanne and I started calling Mackarger's cloud. You can see Mackarger's cloud as his torpedo clouds, and so you'll see connections in more of the contemporary artist's work. So this is a really nice vignette showing those connections there.
And the print works just to the right, the Bill Lobchuk piece. It actually has a fair bit of playfulness if it's paired with another piece that he did. And the dog that's sort of got its head raised looking, I think it's called Noon, and then it's the town's name.
Nipawa Noon, yeah.
Nipawa Noon, that's right. And the dog's head is raised looking at you. And in the companion print, the dog has put his head down. And that's the summary of action at noon. So a lovely bit of gentle humor there, prairie humor as well. Yeah.
So yeah, the prints that we had seen earlier by Joe Faffard and David Thalberger were prints that were actually produced through the Grand Western Canadian Screen Shop. So this is a piece by David Thalberger, Bill and Dolly.
Does it have flocking on it?
It has flocking on it. And so that was an experiment that David Thalberger wanted to do, was to incorporate flocking, which you would see, in a black velvet painting. So again, using sort of referencing craft sort of base materials in his work. And then, the prints there by Joe Faffard. What's interesting too about Joe's piece there of bird's eye, that perspective of having a bird's eye view looking down on the prairie, that's also something that you'll see in some folk artworks, like the work of Johann Maka. And sort of this idea that you're floating above the surface and looking down. I think there's a piece by Johann Maka in the surrealism and fantasy area.
Mm-hmm.
Cake.
Sorry, Kim's getting her exercise here. And it's this one. Yeah. So you can see there the view of the houses. It looks like the perspective is from, hovering up above. And so there's a real shift of perspectives, viewpoints in one canvas.
Yeah. There's quite a bit of, it almost enters into surrealism as well in Johann Maka's work. And he actually did some work with I believe it was his nephew and another artist, where they passed around the paper. They worked from 3 or 4 different sides of the paper, taking turns. And, it seems like a very surrealist kind of exercise. And that ran through the work of other people's work too, like say Jeff Nachtigall, where he did over 60 drawings and paintings, just one after the other. Conversations with myself, I think it's called, and using a whole variety of materials that he got from dumpster diving and things like that, where the element of spontaneity and intuition is really important, as in the piece that you have oh, and I'm just blanking your name, Janet Mitchell. Janet Mitchell, which is and on this farm, which I thought was sort of nearby. But maybe I'm making you walk, Kim.
Is that the bright, colorful one?
Sorry?
The bright, colorful one?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. And on this farm by Janet Mitchell. Very spontaneous and playful and engaging. Yeah. And she's an Alberta artist who had a pretty tough life and minimal training, but sort of really bridges between a folk artist and a contemporary artist in her career. She developed her own stylistic approach and sort of carried through a lot of exuberance and spontaneity in all of her works. And sort of a very interesting bridging of the categories, I guess.
So another, I guess the last, actually, this is a nice piece. This is by Leonard Anthony, again, Manitoba, Winnipeg artist, and who was part of the grand Canadian or Western Canadian screen shop. And this is got flocking on it. And
he puns in the title, I think, too, because I think this is called Barred Cock with Flock.
Right.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Barred Rock Cock with Flock.
Right.
Yeah. So humorous punning. And, I think one of the things that many people would associate with folk art is the sort of the kind of portraiture of animals, where the hen and the rooster in this case. And I think there's a piece nearby called Monarch, which has a portrait of a horse. Is that near? Yeah, it might be somewhere else. Anyway, but it's sort of a folk genre that I think Leonard Anthony. There we go. Laura Harkness.
Harness, yeah.
Harness, yeah, portrait of Monarch. So just making the figure of the animal front and center, with sort of from a straight on point of view that really renders the animal as almost like a historical portrait with that kind of level of importance to it. And Leonard Anthony kind of playing with that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a great connection between this piece and David Thalberger's Bill and Dolly, or is it Dolly and Bill? That print that has the flocking on it. Again, because the horses are front and center, pushed into the foreground, and then you just see the town, sort of perspective of the town in the background, just on the horizon there. So that's a nice kind of connection between David Thalberger and Laura Harness. So Laura Harness's work actually takes us to the final category in the exhibition, which is memory and memoria.
So we identified a difference there too, a subtle difference, like as in between humor and playfulness. Memory being the artist's own personal experience, as I mentioned earlier with Hazel Litzkis, and here we see some of Anne Harbuse's like personal memories, and also Percy Two-Gun Plain Woman there with a couple of portraits, a portrait and a self-portrait. These are actual, personal memories. That's Percy Two-Gun Plain Woman, who is a Kainai artist, very well known in southern Alberta. At the, I guess, early to mid 20th century. And the second aspect of the memory and memoria, we were trying to identify how artists would depict memories that were not necessarily their own. So this one here, again by Percy Two-Gun Plain Woman, called The Last Buffalo Hunt. So this would have far predated him by at least 50 years. But it's drawn from oral history and stories of others, and so it's in that category of Memoria. And this particular piece echoes very poignantly with the work of Adrian Stimson, who is a contemporary Siksika artist, and you put his work very, very close. So the one on the right is called the Bison Abstract 2. And there's the torpedo clouds in the background. There we go. And so he's made the bison figure into something that's massive and strong, and speaks to the continuity of culture. And then the piece on the left, very similar as well. And the connection to the land, which is something that Carmen Robertson brought out a lot in talking about the work of Indigenous artists in this exhibition, the strong connection to the land that continues. Did you want to speak to any of those memory and Memoria pieces in the sort of salon hanging there, Jen?
Yeah, Kim, if you want to, go to the right and just focus on Anne Harbus'
central one.
There.
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah, the one with the wood frame there. So this piece, I can't remember the title of it actually, but this is a great piece. She used to do images like this where, again, there's a real play or a variation of scale within one image, one canvas. So it's like she's pulled the walls and the roofs off of these buildings so that you can get interior views of various buildings in the town.
It's interior, inside views of Whitco. So.
Oh, right. Yeah. So she was living in Whitco, and then around it, you've got various scenes within the landscape of life in the town.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about her work too is that there's another piece by her, and it's called 10 Weddings.
There it is.
That's it. Yeah. And so here she's collapsing time and space in one canvas. So it wasn't that there was 10 weddings that happened all at one time. These are weddings of her children and her grandchildren, like through time. There's also references to Whitco in the painting as well, to the life in their town, but there's also a reference to Saskatoon. I think it's in the upper right corner of the because her children had moved to Saskatoon.
You can actually see them doing that in the painting. You can see them carrying their suitcases from Whitco to Saskatoon, from the rural small town and the farm into the city.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was and there's kind of nice connections to Yahamaka, who was really playing with different perspectives and views and scale and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
In his work.
There we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's that piece is so interesting because she collapses so many things into it. Or expands them out. And Irene Mackarger has a similar painting, which we probably don't have to run around and find unless it's in that grouping.
There's one of her works.
Yeah. And I think that's called Progress Parade of Time.
Right.
And there's everything from, dogs pulling travois to jet planes and, jack pumps and grain elevators and skyscrapers, and I think there's a teepee in there somewhere too. So she's collapsing time as well to show the progress of history through the prairies.
We did include, there are some artists from Red Deer included in the exhibition. In
this grouping, actually.
This grouping, yeah.
So
did you want to talk about that, Joanne?
Oh, yeah, this is Kathleen Maud Baines, and I think, Kim, you have other works by her in the collection that you're showing elsewhere in the galleries. And this would be a depiction of early homesteading and the farm horses, and a little bit of that sort of pulled up perspective, flattened perspective. There's a lovely little idyllic scene. And I think in this section as well, we have Margaret Seeley, and I think it's a snowball fight. And this one's Father Christmas. So, sort of scenes of everyday life and memories of her own. And I think Willard Trimble. Yep, there's Willard Trimble and railway workers. Again, memories of everyday life. And this one I think is called Early Settlers. So they're arriving in Alberta. That's 3 Red Deer artists.
And then there is that piece too by Henry Beaudry that's in this area, and it's the signing of Treaty 6 in North Battleford. So again, referencing a treaty.
Yeah, and this again would have been more Memoria rather than memory, because the treaty was signed in 1896, I think, and so he's drawing upon stories of historical events and tales of historical events and memorializing them that way. And he was a Saskatchewan artist, and it's the Battleford area.
Yeah.
North Battleford.
So I think that that gives it kind of goes through all of the different categories that are featured in the exhibition. Now this show, when it first opened in there's Eva Dennis actually just there.
Yeah, and Hugh Carlson. So many great artists.
Yeah. These are memories of her teaching in a one-room school, and this is not far from Moose Jaw actually. And again, a nice connection to David Thalberger with, again, the house or the schoolhouse being very simplified, sort of abstracted, pushed into the foreground there. But yeah, she used to teach. This is Old Wives School.
Yeah, and you see that just to the left in Jim Carlson's as well, with the river rafting, where it's very flattened and pushed up perspective as well. Yeah. But that does sort of wrap up all the major sections, I think. And so many artists, right? There's 57, 60 some odd artists in the exhibition.
70, I think. Yeah, 70.
Sorry, go ahead.
In Moose Jaw, we had, there was about almost 200 artworks, and then of course for the tour we had to condense it down, but there's still about 100, so it's still such a large representation of Prairie Vernacular works. So we hope that people enjoy the dialogue that's happening throughout the space between historic and contemporary works, and in all these, like looking at sort of the histories, experiences, the culture and environment of the prairies, and the hopes and dreams and tragedies, all of it put together.
Yeah. And I wanted to mention before we finish, I have a copy of the catalog, if I can zoom in. There we go. I think, would you have some, Kim, as well available for people if they're interested?
Yeah, we purchased 10 that we're selling here at the museum. So we'll be going online at some point.
Yeah, and so there's essays about the exhibition by Jen and I, and also by Carmen Robertson on the Indigenous work. Images of one work by every artist in the show, and so it's quite a delightful kind of look through the show until you can get in person.
Yes. Well, I would like to thank Joanne and Jennifer for taking time out of this very beautiful Saturday afternoon and walking us through the gallery. It's always so fascinating every time we learn a little bit more about the pieces and the connections between them. So thank you to Jennifer and Joanne. I don't know if I should just wrap that up with that. And thanks again. We will be having more programming on some Saturday afternoons. So just watch our social media. Have a great day.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Thank you.